Her words weren't an explosion. They were a surgical incision. No emotion, no tremble in her voice. She proposed to open up the marriage like an operating wound. In the name of honesty. At first, he froze. Then he tried to understand. Then, he agreed. Out of love, out of fear, out of hope that something could still be saved. But while she disappeared into other beds and captioned photos with new beginnings, he documented, recorded, collected. She wanted freedom. She got paperwork. Wanted to rise above, ended up with nothing. Wanted to forget, but his name stayed with her. Forever. Her move was strategy. His, retribution. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends or family. It really helps my channel a lot. Please tell me in which city or country you watched this video. I value every one of your comments. So let's get started. The night hung thick with silence, the kind that doesn't settle, it broods. A heavy, invisible pressure clung to the walls of our house, tense and unmoving, like the air before a thunderstorm. Upstairs, Ethan was deep in his schoolwork, no doubt puzzling over equations that he'd eventually carry downstairs for my input. I sat across from Paige, my wife of nearly 10 years, at our dimly lit dining table. We didn't speak. The quiet between us wasn't comfortable. It was electric, with what hadn't been said, like we were both holding our breath, waiting for something to snap. There was no exchange of pleasantries, no reassuring glances. She barely touched her food, pushing it around with mechanical movements, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the room, as if her thoughts had long since left her body. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was simply tired, weighed down by the constant balancing act of work, parenting, and everything in between. Maybe she was distracted by something trivial, an errand she forgot to run, a meeting she hadn't prepared for. But as I watched her more closely, it became painfully clear that this wasn't mere exhaustion. She wasn't just weary, she was distant, purposefully so. Her movements were cautious, almost rehearsed, and she refused to look my way. Her whole demeanor was screaming retreat. Something between us had shifted, something I couldn't name but could feel with every breath. The discomfort twisted in my chest until I could no longer pretend it wasn't there. I broke the silence. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice piercing the stillness like a sharp edge. She paused mid-motion, her fork suspended, and then slowly looked up to meet my eyes. For a brief second, I let myself believe I'd imagined the whole thing, that maybe one look would reset everything. But the moment she opened her mouth, that fragile hope shattered. "I think we should explore the idea of an open marriage," she said, calm and clinical, as if she were suggesting we repaint the living room instead of detonating the foundation of our relationship. My mind stumbled. Did I hear her right? Was she joking? I scanned her face for any trace of irony, but there was none. She leaned back in her chair with a disturbing ease, arms folded across her chest, expression unreadable. "It might actually be good for us," she added, like she was quoting a wellness blog. Her words hit like a blow to the chest. Good for us? How could opening our marriage be the solution when she already felt miles away from me? My thoughts collided in a chaotic mess, each more panicked than the last. This wasn't a discussion, it was a verdict, one she had clearly reached alone. That realization, the fact that she had already decided, was the most chilling part of it all. Her suggestion hovered between us like broken glass, sharp and glittering, impossible to ignore. I sat frozen, trying to process the world she'd just unveiled. "An open marriage?" I echoed, barely louder than a whisper. She didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, almost daring me to argue. "Yes," she said firmly. "It's more common than you think. People grow, relationships shift. Why shouldn't ours?" Under the table, my fists clenched involuntarily. I could feel the pulse hammering in my temples. "That's not what I agreed to," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to contain it. "When we got married, we vowed to be loyal, to be exclusive, to trust each other." I saw something flicker in her expression then, just for a second. The word loyalty landed hard. Her lips pressed into a line, her arms tightened around her ribs like she was bracing herself. "You're being naive," she snapped back, voice colder now, harder. "People change. What worked 8 years ago doesn't have to work forever." Her words were frost-edged, deliberate. "And what about Ethan? I fired back, leaning forward. What happens when he finds out his parents are dating other people? Is that the kind of example you want to set for him? Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood abruptly, scooping up her plate with swift precision. This isn't about him, she said tersely, not meeting my eyes. And honestly, Scott, you're overreacting. If you can't adapt, maybe you're the one keeping us stuck. She turned and left the room without another word, leaving me sitting there, stunned, fury and heartbreak battling in my chest. The silence that settled afterward was suffocating, thicker than before, heavier. 1,000 questions flooded my mind, each darker than the last. Was there already someone else? Had she been planning this for weeks? Months? How long had she been drifting away without me noticing? Everything we'd shared now felt tainted. Every laugh, every kiss, every quiet moment suddenly suspect. Betrayal burned hot in my chest, but I forced myself to stay put, to breathe, to stay centered. I needed understanding more than I needed anger. When I finally spoke again, my voice came out low and steady, controlled but aching. If this marriage is really done, then just say it. My words trailed after her as she disappeared down the hallway, lingering in the quiet like smoke. She halted for a heartbeat but didn't bother facing me. Instead, she gave a lazy shrug, almost dismissive. I knew you'd go there, she said under her breath, and then she was gone, slipping into the kitchen without another word. That night, sleep never arrived. I lay in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling while Paige lay beside me. Whether asleep or simply feigning it, I couldn't be sure. Her breathing was slow, rhythmic, but she felt unfamiliar. The woman I'd loved for nearly a decade now felt more like a tenant than a partner. What stung the most wasn't anger, it was her apathy, not just toward me, but toward Ethan, toward the life we had so carefully pieced together. As days blurred into weeks, the seams of our life began to split, each revelation unraveling like a hidden stitch pulled too tight. Paige hadn't proposed an open relationship on some whim of self-realization or as an experiment in modern love. She'd been planning it, methodically, quietly, for longer than I had suspected. At first, I assumed it was the result of growing dissatisfaction, boredom maybe, a loss of intimacy or connection. But the truth crept in slowly, like a shadow at dusk. She'd been watching someone else, a woman we both knew, who had made the same move successfully. This friend had persuaded her husband to embrace an open relationship, all while keeping the house, the shared finances, the parenting partnership, the outward appearance of togetherness. Paige had studied that blueprint carefully. What motivated her wasn't love, it was calculation. The entire arrangement was transactional. She wanted consistency and freedom in equal measure, a loyal foundation at home, and the thrill of something new on the side. To her, there was no contradiction. She could keep the security of a co-parent, the man who helped raise her child, the comfort of a shared life, and still chase fleeting highs elsewhere. What disturbed me the most wasn't just her intention, it was the precision behind it. She truly believed I'd go along with it, that I'd quietly endorse her double life. Then one night, while absent-mindedly scrolling through social media, I saw the confirmation I hadn't been ready for. A photo, her smile too familiar, the outfit unrecognizable, her posture leaning close to a faceless man whose identity had been conveniently cropped out. They were laughing, comfortably close. The caption was vague, date night vibes, but the truth screamed through it. My stomach turned as I studied every detail, the restaurant in the background, the matching wine glasses, a glinting bracelet on her wrist, one I hadn't given her. She hadn't even bothered to make it discreet. The post was public, garnished with hashtags about self-empowerment and freedom. That night, I held out my phone like evidence in a courtroom. "Want to explain this?" I asked, my voice tight, shaking. She glanced at the screen and then offered a nonchalant shrug, like I was overreacting. "Oh, that? Just dinner with a colleague," she said, her focus already drifting back to her laptop. "You honestly expect me to buy that?" "No need to dramatize," she replied, eyes still locked on the screen. "Well, I am making a big deal out of it," I snapped, slamming my phone down. "You've been laying the foundation for this for months, testing limits, seeing what you could get away with before dropping this on me." For the briefest second, her mask slipped. Guilt flickered across her face, then vanished, replaced by an icy resolve. "Maybe I have," she said flatly. Maybe you should ask yourself what made me look elsewhere in the first place. Her words landed like a slap, not because they were fair, but because they revealed how deeply self-centered this had become. She wasn't trying to salvage anything. She was chasing attention, validation. I had become a supporting character in her quest for excitement. The betrayal went far beyond infidelity. The next morning, the house felt unnaturally quiet. Even the air seemed heavier, like it too was holding back. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, one hand around her coffee, the other scrolling aimlessly through her phone. Her eyes stayed glued to the screen. It was as if I were invisible. I lingered, waiting, for a glance, a nod, anything. There was nothing. Even at our worst, we'd always managed a goodbye. Today, not even that. "Morning," I said, softly. She didn't reply, didn't look up, just sipped her drink and kept scrolling. Her silence cut deeper than any insult. At work, I kept glancing at my phone, half hoping for a text, some kind of message, just a word, a check-in. But there was nothing, no curiosity, no concern. It was as if I'd been erased, like my presence had quietly expired. That evening, the silence between us had grown into a vast, unbridgeable distance. We sat across from each other, eating in the same space, but living in separate realities. I tried to breach the silence. "How was your day?" She barely looked up. "Fine." "That issue at work? Did it get sorted?" She nodded once. "Yeah." That was it. No elaboration, no warmth. Just cold, functional replies. I felt like a stranger asking polite questions, not the man who had once shared everything with her. And what broke me wasn't just the distance between us. It was the fact that she didn't seem to care. In the days that followed, the space between us didn't shrink. It calcified, hardened into something immovable, something final. Paige had stopped pretending altogether. When she wasn't outright ignoring me, she treated me as if I were barely there, a silent fixture in the room. She'd sit right next to me on the couch, eyes glued to her phone, smiling at texts she made no attempt to hide. Her fingers danced over the screen with a kind of excitement I hadn't seen from her in years. One evening, I finally asked, "Who are you talking to?" She barely glanced up, rolling her eyes with theatrical annoyance. "Nobody," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But the color in her cheeks and the frantic movement of her hands told a different story. Not long after, she began going out more frequently, dressed to impress, looking like someone who had no ties. Pricey outfits, perfect makeup, and hair styled like she was meeting someone who mattered. When I asked where she was off to, she'd give vague, dismissive answers. "Just out with friends," she'd mutter, already stepping into her heels. If I pressed her further, she'd let out an exaggerated sigh, grab her purse and snap, "Why do you even care?" before storming out. Some nights, she didn't come home at all. No texts, no calls, no explanations. And when she did return, it was late. She'd head straight to the bathroom, then crawl into bed in silence. The smell of alcohol clung to her skin, but I stayed quiet. I already knew the script. If I brought it up, she'd scoff, roll her eyes, and call me paranoid. But one night, I couldn't hold it in. She stumbled through the door, hair messy, her perfume mingling with the scent of booze. I stood in the hallway, arms crossed, my patience wearing thin. "Paige, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm but tired. She looked at me briefly, a smirk tugging at her lips, and let out a bitter laugh. "No, we really don't," she said coolly, brushing past me as though I were invisible. That was when reality hit me. Whatever love had once bonded us was gone. She shut the bedroom door behind her, leaving me standing in the dark with nothing but her indifference. It's one thing to fear your partner doesn't love you anymore. It's another when your child begins to sense it too. One evening, while I was rinsing dishes, Ethan turned to me, his face puzzled. "Dad, why doesn't Paige eat with us anymore?" he asked, his voice soft. I froze. How could I explain to an 11-year-old that someone he still saw as family had checked out completely? I forced a smile, ruffled his hair, and said, "She's just really busy, buddy." A lie, and I prayed he couldn't see through it. He didn't press me further, but I saw the uncertainty in his eyes. That night, after putting him to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a ghost Paige had already forgotten. The breaking point came around 2 a.m. I woke to the faint sound of laughter. Groggy, I turned my head to find her lying beside me, her face illuminated by her phone's glow. She was smiling, texting away, completely absorbed. I didn't move, just watched. Every tap of her fingers felt like a knife to the chest. Maybe she thought I was asleep, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. That moment shattered something in me. I'd been clinging to hope that this was just a rough patch, that we'd find our way back. But seeing her so involved with someone else while lying next to me made it clear she was already gone, and somehow she expected me to endure it. I was done. The next morning, while she slept, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to leave recklessly. I'd go on my own terms. I began gathering proof. Every unexplained absence, every cold remark, every time she dismissed my concern with, "Why do you care?" Then one day, the opportunity came. She left her phone unattended. I picked it up, opened her messages, and captured everything. Screenshots of every flirtatious exchange, every revealing conversation. I sent them to myself. Insurance, in case she ever tried to twist the truth. After that, I called a lawyer. I needed clarity on my rights, a roadmap for what came next. This wasn't just about walking away. It was about protecting myself from whatever story she might try to spin. Then I moved to the next phase. I contacted my boss. I'd been contemplating a transfer for a while, but I'd held off, not wanting to abandon Paige. That hesitation was gone. My request was approved with no resistance. The final piece was finding a new place to live. Once the apartment was secured, everything was ready. A new beginning was within reach. I just had to wait for the right moment. Leaving couldn't be impulsive. It had to be careful, intentional, precise. The longer I observed her, the more certain I became. She wasn't hiding her disdain anymore. Her apathy was blatant. She came and went on her own terms, brushing off my questions like they were beneath her. But what hurt most was how little attention she paid to Ethan. It was like he was just another burden she never asked for, someone she barely acknowledged anymore. She once claimed to love him, despite the fact that he wasn't hers by blood. But now, it was as though he had never mattered to her. That was the moment I knew. I had to walk away. When I left that morning, Paige was probably still in bed, unaware that the quiet undoing of everything had already begun. There were no hints, no alarms, nothing that might have tipped her off to the shift underway, but the silence would eventually speak for itself. As she moved through the rooms of the house, the emptiness would start to settle around her. She would begin to notice the details. The backpack Ethan always dropped by the door was gone. The spot where my shoes sat was bare, the familiar rhythms of our routine replaced by a hollow stillness. She'd eventually wander into the kitchen for her first cup of coffee. That's where she'd see it, a single envelope placed beside the machine. Inside, the divorce papers were arranged in neat precision, needing only her signature. Resting on top, a yellow, sticky note bore my handwriting, still recognizable. "I hope you find the freedom you were searching for." I could guess what her reaction might be, but honestly, I no longer cared. She never reached out. No calls, no texts, not even a half-hearted attempt at contact. If she felt regret, it wasn't enough to pick up the phone. And that, in itself, told me everything I needed to know. The next time I heard from her, it wasn't her voice I encountered. It came in the form of a letter, professionally typed, emotionless, signed at the bottom in her name. What did she want? Money. Not closure, not understanding, just compensation. There was no hint of remorse in that message. No indication she wanted to mend anything. Paige had never truly embraced Ethan as her own, and certainly not with the care a parent should show. Motherhood had always seemed like a costume she wore reluctantly. When I left, she didn't even pretend to want custody. That wasn't what mattered to her. She was after a payout. Her lawyer's letter was as distant as she had become, detailing terms like we were business partners dissolving a contract. She wanted financial support, a division of everything, a settlement, like she'd earned her share. She was more than capable of making it on her own, but that wasn't enough. She demanded half, as though she was entitled to it. The audacity might have been laughable if it weren't so enraging. She wasn't after fairness. She wanted a trophy for the years she spent making me feel disposable. But I came prepared. When it was time to face the court, I brought everything. Months of records, evidence of her neglect, of the nights she vanished without explanation, of the messages that exposed how long she had emotionally stepped away from the marriage. Even before she asked to open it, my lawyer presented it all, clean and clear. The hearing didn't drag on. The judge ruled swiftly. Paige walked away with nothing. She had counted on my silence, on the quiet man who let things slide. She thought she could minimize me and still profit in the end. But she lost. And there was no one to blame but herself. It's been over 2 years since I left, with Ethan beside me and that life firmly in the rearview mirror. In all that time, she never once made contact. She moved on, and so did I. I can't claim I'm fully healed, but I stopped hoping for an apology that would never come. I made peace with the quiet. Closure didn't arrive the way people imagine it should. And then, one evening as I stood over the stove preparing dinner, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in ages, Paige. I never deleted her number. I can't say why. I just stared at the screen, my hand hovering, unmoving. A part of me already knew. Calls like that only come when there's something they need. Still, I answered. "Scott," she said, her voice stripped of its usual certainty. She sounded unsure, hesitant, like someone trying to re-enter a space they once destroyed. I just wanted to say, "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile and unsure. I could hear the hesitation, how carefully she placed each word, unsure whether I'd cut her off. "I was selfish," she added, barely audible. "I thought you'd always be there. I didn't believe you'd really leave." I shut my eyes and let out a long breath. The realization was finally reaching her, but far too late. Then came the words I'd anticipated all along. "I miss you." But there was nothing inside me. No pain. No resentment. Just a void. I exhaled, my voice even and distant. "Do you miss me? Or do you miss being loved by someone you never earned?" She didn't speak. The silence answered for her. "Scott, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. But that part of me, the man who waited, who excused everything, who shrank just to keep the peace, no longer existed. "Paige," I said, calm and final, "I truly hope you find peace. But I'm not coming back." I ended the call, and in the stillness that followed, I became aware of a burden I hadn't known I was still carrying, finally lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in ages, a deep calm settled over me. Ethan and I had built something genuine from nothing, a life anchored in effortless joy, solid trust, and a connection that felt completely real. The wounds from earlier chapters of my story were still there, but they no longer dictated the present. I had reclaimed my own narrative, turning a past marked by betrayal into a well of resilience. As I stood in our cozy, well-worn kitchen, slowly stirring the soup on the stove while Ethan laughed at something ridiculous playing on the TV, a quiet understanding took root inside me. Real vindication doesn't come from causing harm to the one who wronged you. It comes from reclaiming what was always yours, your voice, your calm, your identity, and creating a life so full of meaning and love that it drowns out every old whisper of doubt about your value. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.